Okay. All right. By the way, you're in Toronto, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I am about to begin a wonderful chat with a Canadian-Argentinian pianist. We're going to talk about that. Alexander Panizza. We're going to talk about your. I mean, I probably sound like I say this at every interview, but it's because at every interview with people that I'm so lucky to really study their CDs, I'm just blown away. This is an all Ravel CD that Alexander has put together for Akashic Classics, and we'll get all that information up on the page that we're going to put up at performingartsreview.net. Panizza Plays Ravel. How clear how much clearer can you be? Here's the program, and then we'll start really digging into a few things, and I'll let you know who Alexander Panizza is. Gaspard de Longwy, every pianist knows this. Work Jeu d'eau. I should say Jeu d'eau. I'm trying. Miroir and La Valse to end the CD. And I just want to say that I've heard these works many, many times over many, many, many years, and we had a talk earlier. There's something very, very special about the way you play Ravel. It's
Thank you.
really beautiful, beautiful, and very French, if I may say so, to a Canadian Argentinian. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Alexander Panizza, born in Toronto, and then you started your musical education there at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto, right? As
Yes.
a gun. And then as a teenager, the whole family packed up and went back to Argentina. Your parents are Argentinian, yeah? Am I okay so far? Um, and let's see, and help you've done. Then you kind of went off and traveled around the world. Why don't you help me out and finish it up for me
Well,
instead of me
yes.
mouthing off?
Uh, I went to Argentina, but the actual plan was not to stay too long. But I ended up meeting who is now my wife, and that sort of made me stay a lot longer than expected. And then I continued. I actually went to Argentina because uh, my father's uncles and his mother, my grandmother, they were all professional musicians
Oh,
in
nice.
Buenos Aires
Mm.
during the 1920s, 1930s. And he was very, he always, it was like a golden era for Buenos Aires. I mean, you had Anselm conducting at the
Oh, yeah,
Colón.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
King lived for a while there. It was a very important center. And he kept telling me, you should go study in Buenos Aires. You should go study. And so, and I went to Argentina. I love the country, and I didn't need too much convincing. I said, sure. And so I continued my studies in Argentina. But then it came a point where it was going to, you usually have to go back to one of the big centers, which in my case was Europe. I mostly in Paris and London, but I also studied for a while in Barcelona and Geneva. And then for family reasons, because we decided to have children, we wanted to be near the extended family. We went back to Argentina. And only about just under 5 years ago, with my family, with my wife, my two sons, our two sons, my two dogs, we moved back to Canada. So I'm back to Canada. I'm a bit of a newcomer, but also Canadian. It's a very interesting position.
hmm. Yeah, very much so. And you have a piano studio in Toronto, private
Yes, I
studios.
do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Uh, Sorry, a car's going by rather loudly. And for a while, you were teaching at Catholic University in Buenos Aires, and that has ended just recently, as you kind of the back and
Yes.
forth has been too tough, huh?
In Argentina, I was teaching at a music college in one city. I lived in the city called Rosario,
Mm.
which is just about 300 kilometers from Buenos Aires. But I had the class of piano concertos at the Catholic University, and I maintained it. I tried to maintain it as best I could when I moved to Canada, but then logistically it became very difficult, and so I sort of that stopped fairly recently. And here, again, when I moved here, I since most of my activity was more in South America and Europe, I didn't really move here with too many connections.
Mm.
I had one colleague, a very generous friend colleague, who sort of invited me to do some master class at the University of Toronto, but I sort of tried to maintain my performance career.
You'll have to wait just a moment while the fire engine goes by. I'm in downtown Greater Santa Barbara, and yeah, sure enough, every loud instrument and beast and creature will go by during our interview. Anyway, I hope all is well wherever they're going.
Yes.
So, where were you? Where were we?
No, no, I was saying that. when I first came here, I did very little teaching because I tried to maintain my performance career, which was mostly in other countries. So actually, during the first 2.5 years I was here, I was out of the country for around 7 months. But then, as we know, what happened with the pandemic and everything, if you had to design the most fragile possible career you could have for something like that, mine would be the textbook case. So basically, like most of my colleagues, my performance
All
is
of us.
lost.
All of us in all of the performing arts, it's shut down completely worldwide. Stunning. And I don't think humans are yet coming to grips with what happened to us, the
No,
after effect.
it's
We're
going to
not
be
even
years.
close to understanding it.
It's going to be years until things sort of like, I mean, it was a
Yeah.
very, at first you think, okay, it's going to be a short term, take advantage of the time to practice the pieces I've been wanting to, but then it just kept getting longer and longer, and you start thinking how you're going to cope in every way. It's not just
Yeah.
economically, but it's also your head. I was very much into performing, and but silver lining, because of that, it allowed me to develop several other things. Among them, the possibility to develop my teaching studio here, which has grown very much. But also, this CD is a bit of a product of a very interesting collaboration that started during the pandemic, which was great, and many good artistic things came out of such a horrible reality.
Let me jump in for a second because in my case, I did exactly the same thing. I thought, oh, great, I'm going to get caught up on all the back work I have to do, all the CD review, all this. I'm going to get caught up. And then I went into complete paralysis and wound up staring out the window at the empty streets and wondering what on earth was happening to the planet. I mean, it is that huge an event in all of our lives. And again, where it's over, things are kicking in big time again, all that good stuff. But who knows? World War III, a return of something else, the climate. I mean, the whole. I hope humans are aware how fragile we are on the planet.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
so.
this certainly brought it home very quickly. Also, the other thing is, in my case, when I moved here, I of course have extended family and friends in Argentina, and what I always say is, I'm only 12 hours away. I just hop on a plane and I'm there. The world was very small, and suddenly it became enormous. You couldn't even
Yeah,
travel 20 kilometers,
yeah,
and this was a very strange feeling. So especially in the case where I had my family spread out in two
mm,
countries, and it's sort of, yes, a lot of things were brought to attention that sort of one
yeah.
forgets about.
Yeah, so I hope we're all going to grow from this experience, but I am still convinced that we as human beings are still not aware of how powerfully this event has affected every single one of us.
Yeah.
So now we move forward and all of that, and it has been a very sobering experience, you know, for the planet and all the rest of it. Now let's talk happy talk about Ravel. I just want to mention his years just so everybody gets a little bit of a framework, of course, in the profession everybody does, but because I'm fascinated by history. It puts everything together. It puts the kind of puts everything together. And in this case, born in 1875, really toward the end of the 19th century, it dies almost right, well, just before the Second World War. But I mean, what a wonderful span of years to see the world change so completely.
I don't
That's
know if wonderful is the word I use for that period. That period was pretty brutal as
yeah,
well. But in terms of change, there's no doubt. In terms of,
yes,
and it's very much present in his music as well.
absolutely,
Is the advent of, like if you're saying about history, like for example, in World War One, the advent of the machine gun, how that changed
mm.
everything, and
And the
catastrophic,
tank.
and the tank. But this technology, this mechanization, also went into the music, and this concept of rhythm, this concept of regularity. Sometimes I have to tell my students that when Beethoven writes tempo giusto, he doesn't mean the atomic clock. It's a human parameter. Just play in a strict sort of time, more sort of related to a heartbeat more than this exact pulse. Whereas in Ravel's music, you already have some of this clockwork kind of rhythm and things. And he was very much a sponge of all of this. He was
Yeah.
very interested in the futuristic elements, aesthetic elements, and he had such incredible craftsmanship as well. So yeah, this combination is, I've always found it marvelous.
And he ran with the intelligentsia, the French intelligentsia. He was extremely literate. He ran with a, as we were speaking before the taping, a very highly intelligent, intellectual crowd. And there are secrets, and there are codes, and there are mystiques
Winks,
between them.
a
Yeah.
whole bunch of things. It's a bit like what happens in Hollywood movies now, where the visual effects team, they put a whole bunch of things in the movies that nobody can tell except them. They can find and all these things. And his music is full of references.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to find it. And I really even think that it's interesting to the point where it doesn't even matter if one's right with what you discover. You discover something, you find a connection, and I don't really think it's that important if that was actually the case or not. I think just the potential of that connection informs your performance of it. At least that's what happens in my case. It's like a detective game, but then you're sort of in an aesthetic world, so you don't really have the burden of truth behind you. You just
Oh,
in a way.
you just described what I do as a music critic. I
Ah,
really, I kind of have the burden of proof behind me, but all of it is intuition and speculation.
yes.
And that I want to, we are going to get on to discussing this album, so I'm going to try and get us there, which is to say, this is I mean, it's practically a cliche, but this is a fully narrative CD. Everything on this CD is describing a story or an image or a drawing or all of that good stuff. And that also I find fascinating with Ravel. There's such super intelligence and so involved in the world. And then one other thought, because it'll deal with La Valse later when we talk about it. I have really become obsessed with the planet and its survival of world wars
Hmm.
and the trauma, 30, 40 years of trauma in all directions around the event itself, particularly the Napoleonic Wars. It's taken me a long time to realize that everybody for 30, 40, 50 years afterward was just shocked and paralyzed and traumatized by the Napoleonic Wars. Thus, as you know, as we know, Ravel also, World War I was a devastating experience for him. And
Yes.
he speaks to it in La Valse and other
And
words.
the valse in his piano concerto for the left hand as well.
Aha, yes.
It's permeated by this sort of
For obvious reasons, aside from being composed for a veteran of the war who lost it.
Wittgenstein. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're looking at Ravel. Let's see. What I think we've discussed. Have we sound libraries yet? I got a little lost in all of our conversations so far, pre and post.
We haven't discussed it.
Well, okay, thanks. Here's what I discovered. As I'm looking over the CD, I realized, and this thing, it's plainly here that you had chosen a sound sample. I'm going to let you give it to us because you're the pianist here, but of a Bosendorfer, a very famous Bosendorfer, as I understand from what we were saying. Give me that whole story because sound sampling is amazing.
Well, it's interesting because in Argentina, I had basically a recording studio, and I've edited I've done most of the musical editing of all of my CDs. I've recorded uh, a lot. I recorded the complete Beethoven piano sonatas from a live concert, but I did the editing, the Kinastera piano works, most of them, but it's always the traditional recording studio.
And
Piano
by the
and
way, you are the producer of this CD, of the new CD, the Ravel
yes,
CD. Yeah.
yes, I am.
So
Yes,
continue, please.
and I did the editing except for the mastering,
Sure.
which is out of my pay grade. It's above my pay grade, and no, but I've always enjoyed that process. And then being being at home in this situation where you can't really interact with people because you couldn't get together, uh, I decided to try to find ways where I could combine my skills from both sides of the recording studio. And so I was already familiar with different instrument libraries, and I started doing my research of the most realistic, the best instrument library, piano instrument library for classical music, for for what I was looking for. And I came across this. It's called Vienna Instruments. They have an entire suite. I mean, they have an entire suite which is quite incredible. But among their collection, they have one which is called Busendorfer Imperial, which is basically what it is. It's a real piano recorded. Basically, they record everything, every note on the piano from different microphone positions and different intensities, and they build this entire sound library, and then the software accesses the relevant sounds to build, well, based on your touch on the piano. So when you're playing, that information accesses. It's quite incredible if you think about it. It's really incredible.
It's scary, incredible.
It's scary, incredible.
You know, it's stunning, marvelous, fabulous.
What it permits you to do is suddenly you have a recording studio in your home, because you don't have the problem with room acoustics, which is a very serious problem. I mean, in a real recording studio, just getting the room right is already, and you don't have the problem of not being able to interact in person with people. And so it actually started a little bit before the CD. There was a project. So just before, I have to tell a little bit of a longer story to sort of.
Sure. I'm easy.
So just before, at the end of 2019, I performed Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto here in Toronto, and I was introduced to a conductor, Ron Royer, who came to the concert, and we talked after, and we sort of decided to keep in touch, get together, and then when the pandemic hit, I sort of was telling him that I wanted to get into making music videos, making videos of my performances, but I didn't want to do the typical filming me playing while I'm playing. I wanted to sort of try to get into the visual element as well, and try to think of the lack of the physical presence of a live concert. How do you make up for that in a video? Like, what kind of imagery can help the performance? So imagery. And he found it interesting. He said, "Look, we're doing an online series for the Scarborough Philharmonic. Would you like to submit a couple of videos?" And we were saying, "Well, what could it be?" "Well, maybe like something." I wanted to get into Ravel a bit more. I was telling him. He goes, "Okay, well, let's do a series of videos on Ravel." So that's how it started. Judo was the first one, where I did a video, and it sort of went well. And so from Judo, I did, I think it was Gaspard La Nuit, and then I did La Valse, and then
Are these on YouTube? Will I be able to find these? So I'll put them up on the page for sure.
Yes.
That's exciting.
And it really took off. Like, people really liked it. I had to restudy. I had to learn video. I was studying cinematography. I was trying to get an idea of how to work with the image, to try to get, because I said, if the image is of bad quality, it sort of goes against the purpose of that. And so when this happened, then he said, "Oh, there's a lot of positive feedback. We should turn this into a CD." And I said, "Okay," but in a way, my performances for those videos were taking into account the visual aspect. And if I were to listen to the music without the visual aspect, I would think maybe differently in terms of tempo, in terms of, I would like to re-record. So I said, I'll do the Ravel CD, but I'll do all new recordings. I'll record all. So the CD is linked to the videos, but the performances are not the same. They're not the same performance.
And that makes perfect sense. That you really would have no choice. I think you would have had to have re-recorded for the CD circumstance, wouldn't you?
I think so.
That's an amazing story. And you mentioned just in passing Scarborough Philharmonic, which I know have been associated with. I presume in Toronto, in Greater Toronto, there are probably 3 or 4 orchestras at various levels. But where does Scarborough Philharmonic fit in? Is it a separate city, a suburb? How does that orchestra
Scarborough
work?
is a part of Toronto. It's a neighborhood of Toronto, a very big neighborhood of Toronto. But it's not in the suburbs.
Yeah. Okay, just wanted to, and these are professionals or semi-professionals, or how
It's
does
a
that work?
community orchestra,
Community
so it's a mix.
Yeah.
It has a certain amount of professional musicians, and then a lot of music, aspiring professional musicians
Sure.
who are playing in orchestras here.
Yep.
So
No, no,
there's a
yeah, I
very
know very
wide
well about these kinds of orchestras. That's about where I functioned as a conductor, right around the fringes of the Seattle Symphony, the
yeah,
other orchestras in the area and
and
so
it's
on.
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a very vibrant thing, and there's a a great energy in these orchestras
Mhm.
because of the spirit in which it's done. Where some like the experience of performing with orchestras like that are actually sometimes more rewarding than maybe performing with more
Yeah.
like full-fledged professional orchestras, where uh, it's very business-like. You have one rehearsal,
Yeah.
you go, you literally,
Yeah.
it's like it's just a transaction
Which is
line,
nice.
which is nice as well, which is nice as well. But I'm saying this, what some of the times these orchestras maybe lack in that very top level
Yeah.
finish, they make up for the
Exactly. Yeah.
energy and
Yeah.
the
Exactly
just
right.
spirit of music making.
And also just spreading the love of music. I mean, to have these orchestras, as you can imagine, in Los Angeles, there are 3 or 4 professional orchestras anyway,
Yes,
and then a whole slug of so-called community orchestras that, of course, I remember this very well. You have your people you work with regularly, and then you bring in a couple ringers, and throw a check at them, and it all works. So it's
yes,
I'm clear.
yes.
All
And it's
right.
amazing how if you choose when you have a good eye of choosing what to bring in, how it lifts the level of the
Oh,
entire orchestra.
absolutely. Yeah. And that also is very good. What I mean by that is these musicians that play in these kinds of orchestras are growing and growing and growing, and that's part of the enthusiasm in the musicianship and all the rest of it. So it's wonderful. We discussed water imagery, didn't we? Again, I can't quite remember what we talked about off
We were
camera.
sort of mentioning about just that it's very programmatic, the program. We didn't
Yeah.
specifically mention water, I think, but it is
Okay,
true.
good. Because
Water permeates everything.
Well, that was I'm glad that you reminded me whether or not we had, what we had discussed previous, because it's a very, very important topic, because the CD, when you really get down to it, is water, water, water. I mean, there is water imagery all over the place in the pieces chosen and so on, and that ain't no accident. It's partly your choices,
Yes,
by the
yes.
way,
Well,
big
basically,
time.
it's absolutely. And well, the whole, I think water in general is associated with that period in French music in a way that it's very prevalent even in Debussy. Uh, Late Liszt also was
Ah,
very, and in terms of aesthetics, I've always aspired to have a very liquid kind of way of conceiving rhythm. And I mean, if I'm going to play Petrushka or something like Alvarada, it's not, I'm going to look for something else. But I very much like the characteristics of water, and so which obviously that attracted me to this repertoire. The emotional center of this CD for me is Gaspard Lanoui, which is the work that I've been with
yeah.
the most in my life. I remember when I was much younger than now. I remember I told my teacher I want to study Ravel, and he goes, okay, but you have to be methodical. Do first learn the toccata of the Le Tombeau de Couperin, then do the Valse Noble et Sentimentale, and then start Gaspard Lanoui. So of course I learned Gaspard Lanoui first because that was the piece I wanted to do, and and so and of those pieces, they're all marvelous. But Ondine, I think, is so incredible. I think it's magical what he does there.
Well, and we'll tear that one up, all of them apart a little bit. But I think this is a perfect opportunity to discuss, as we did again off camera, your 2 kind of opposing teachers. Give me that story and how you came out somewhere in between.
Well, I've been very lucky to have been in contact with some very interesting musical personalities, and of them, uh, when I went to Europe, I studied for 2 years in Paris with Emile Naumov, who was a student of Nadia Boulanger, and then I studied in London for 2 years with Irina Savitskaya, who was a Russian pianist. Uh, she a marvelous Russian pianist who taught at the Menuhin School. She taught at the
Hmm.
Menuhin School and at the Royal College, and they were very different personalities. When I was studying with Emile in Paris, it was all this school of Nadia Boulanger, and every note played had a significance. had a subtext of a subtext of a subtext of intentions of direct, and it was marvelous. You could find so many ideas and references.
By the way, you just described your playing on this
Oh,
CD.
okay.
You,
And
you're answering my questions. What makes this so different? Well, it's that knowing these things, these subtexts, and as with Boulanger, dissecting everything very carefully and thoroughly. Now, sorry, go ahead.
yes, and for me it was fantastic, but at one point it almost generated a sort of pianistic paralysis. There was so much. It was
Oh,
almost
I
it
see.
was almost like a platonic ideal, which I was almost paralyzed with the intention, no. And then but it was fantastic. When I went to study with Irina, she was a very natural pianist. Everything
Mm.
was just he was just like try
Mm.
intuitively just resolve the problems, look for a very like beautiful sound, uh, beautiful simple sound. Keep it honest music making, and this combination is very much I think it's sort of I can tell it really it's sunk in on me in the sense that I believe both. I think I would say yes to both. I
Uh,
think all of the subtext is there, but at the end of the day, that informs your intuition, and then you have to have a more. You can't control it while you're doing it. You have to. It has to. You have to hope it permeates through your playing, through your natural playing.
Okay,
And
you have just once again absolutely superbly reviewed your own CD because, as I mentioned to you, and I want to make sure everybody's clear, I've heard this repertoire recorded by all kinds of people for years and years and years and years. There was something very, very different about this, about your interpretation, your intuitive understanding, your Nadia Boulanger intellectual dissecting of each and every little fragment. It's gorgeous, and also this playing. Again, so often these works in particular, because they're so familiar, can tend to be sort of overplayed. I guess is my way of speaking to it, which is fine and dandy and stuff. But it was so refreshing to hear what I think you have intuited, which is, Ravel didn't need any help. He wrote down exactly what would happen if I'm if I'm making any sense at all, and you play it. You see what I mean? You don't need to kind of go off bombastically in certain directions that other pianists tend to. So I was very interested to hear that.
oh, I always try to. I always try. I think that the fact that I was born in Canada and lived in Argentina, these sort of there's this sort of I'm sort of in the periphery of like the. I think if had I lived all my life in Paris or all my life
Mm.
in London or something, I think it would have been much harder to develop my own perspective on things. I think by being a little bit on the side,
Aha.
being in contact with, absorbing, but also having a perspective of a different perspective, and not trying to conform to a certain school. Like I would never I was never comfortable with this sort of idea of trying to play like the French school or the Russian school. I always thought, no, it's a different process for me. For me, it was always I have to, and it's something which I firmly believe. I try to teach in that line as well. I try to maintain a connection to the subjective from the very start because many times classical music is taught almost like, okay, you know nothing yet, so you have to do everything I tell you,
Aha. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you learn, you'll be able to decide.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the people who are most capable of following orders aren't necessarily the people who are most capable of thinking creatively. Otherwise, you have to nurture that creativity always, and this sort of made me always try to again not purposely do things differently, but to
Thank you.
not be afraid to just sort of back my intuition. I think this should go this way. I think this, and try to sort of just let my playing sort of justify it, and not saying, oh, I'm playing like this because in this article the appoggiatura is supposed to play this kind of thing is very foreign to me. Although I consider myself pretty cerebral when it comes to thinking about music. I'm very clear that the performance aspect has to have this sort of subjective connectivity, and this is why a lot of my pianistic references are like this. I'm a huge fan of Wilhelm Kempf, for example. And when I was preparing the Beethoven cycle, for example, I had 17 complete Beethoven recordings from all the giants.
That's what you got to do, right?
And I'd
The
use it like an
research.
encyclopedia. I'd be
Yeah.
working on something and I'd be stuck on a musical thing, and I'm saying,
Mm.
okay, let's see. And a lot of times I discover even great musicians, I think, oh, they haven't solved what's bothering
Mm-hmm.
me. They didn't. Kemp
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
always solved it, always. And it was because, how did he solve it? He probably did something different than what apparently looks on the score. He he solved the musical problem. He was focusing on the sound more than on the visual fidelity. And this was, I found, very powerful.
You've used the word intuition a few times, and I believe in intuition powerfully. But more importantly is this idea of looking at things, solving them, working things through independently. And in my own experience, I have composer friends. They've written a piece for piano, for example. 7 pianists play it. It makes no sense at all, and then one pianist somehow figures it out, and all of a sudden it's Mozart. You know what I mean? And once again, I'm not going to let you compliment yourself anymore, but it is what you have described though is exactly my impression, and of this CD and of your playing, and it's hard to describe, but it's a certain ease. I mean, and we know you work your tail off. We're going to talk about one particular movement coming up, but it's when you are comfortable with what you have solved, with the solutions you've created, the intuitions you've arrived at about how things work, and that made this CD very, very special, very, very special. And it's again, you chose repertoire that we all know, you know.
Yes.
And that's why I don't know when I figured it out, maybe in the shower earlier this afternoon, but it's been puzzling me. What is it? What is it? And it's that gorgeous, smooth playing that you've described in these works that can tend to be maybe in some performances a bit jagged or a bit overly dramatic. It's that, as I mentioned to you, and I'll mention it again in case I didn't on the air, but as I told you, to me, I heard all 10 fingers. Now, that's about as good a compliment as I can think
I
of.
used them all. I did use them
I'm
all.
sure you did. There are more notes than fingers.
And on some, I've had to play 2 notes with 1 finger, so I guess that would maybe 11 or 12 in some cases.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll give you that. But my point, obviously, is that as I told you, I heard everything in such detail, Boulanger, and her student who taught you. And again, I'm so surprised by your Russian teacher, probably because I'm stuck in a stereotype about Russians as being very bombastic and all that Russian school of drama and destroy the instrument if possible. And, it's probably...
But you know that one of when I first went to Argentina, I went to study with a fantastic teacher, fantastic. Uh, and the very first lesson, I remember this really stuck. He said that he sort of started to explain to me how a string vibrates. And so he said, when you hit the string with a hammer, you have all the different harmonics resonating. And he said, if the hammer hits the string too fast, it chokes out the bigger harmonics, and you're left with the shorter harmonics, which gives you this metallic sound. And I remember just that. I was always very present of that, and I've always been very trying to, because I do have a big sound. I've developed the possibility of like I played a lot with orchestra,
Mhm.
and I've always tried to be heard, even in the big concertos, and I've developed a big sound, but I've always very, very wary of banging. I don't like, and I remember another thing, I had another great teacher in Argentina who was my main teacher there, because this first teacher passed away fairly quickly after we started. And he studied with Michelangelo in Italy, this other teacher
Yes,
who
yes.
was, and he said that Michelangelo would always say, non pestare, non pestare, don't hit the piano, don't hit the piano. All of his students, he drives them crazy with that non pestare. And these things stuck. This challenge of how to create the illusion of a big sound without thinking in terms of decibels, where you just have to just hit the maximum, which leads sometimes to banging or over too much,
Yeah.
basically.
And once again, you've exactly described what I've been trying to describe in my own mind for the past 4 hours, which is exactly that. You have a big sound. And the repertoire on this CD has some big, moments,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
and it's like, I don't know, it's just exactly right. There's
Oh, well,
okay,
thank you.
so
Thank you.
it's one, and surprisingly so, because I'm so used to hearing more kind of dramatic performances of a lot of this repertoire, and I think you've intuited this music exactly right.
Oh,
As
well,
as I mentioned earlier, Ravel gives it all to you,
yeah,
really. He gives it
absolutely.
all to you. You don't have to do much. It's all there. He's no dummy. Studied with Fauré. Come on,
Mhm.
one of the great pianists in his own right, let alone Fauré, and so on. All right, now we've got to speak to these pieces. Let's just go from top down and see if we can kind of get things in about a half an hour. We don't have to go into great detail, but okay. First suite, if you will, Gaspard de la Nuit, three poems for piano by Louis Bertrand, Gaspard of the Night, fantasies in the manner of Rembrandt and Callot, the painters, from 1908. So it's pre-war. Let's go. And now it's your turn because I couldn't possibly explain it as well. But first movement, Ondine, mermaid under
Well,
the water image.
yes, this piece is incredible. Uh, I remember once when I played it was the first time I played with orchestra. This is the first time I played with orchestra. Things were still recorded in cassette tapes, so it's been a while. But I remember listening. I played at the encore, the Chopin, the last etude is C minor,
Mhm.
sometimes called Ocean, which is just a arpeggio.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to it, and I'm thinking, but there's a French horn playing, there's a trombone. I heard all these instruments, and it's just the complexity of the resonance of the pedal
I
with
see.
the hall, with everything that created all this. And Ondine has that. Ondine, you play individual notes, but you get this aggregate of just these incredible effects.
Like
The
chimeras, like
the
those
shimmer
chimeras effects in the
the
opening.
shimmer reading, which is a nightmare to
I'll
learn.
bet.
It's so difficult,
Yeah.
and you have to find this balance between clarity but not mechanical to maintain this liquid aspect. It has to be clear, but it can't be like a little metronome
Mm-hmm.
playing way. This beginning, I think, this
Mm-hmm.
like, and then the voice of Ondine and this sort of almost Gregorian chant like melody, it's just moving up and down, meandering, and how it combines with these resonance. I've always found it incredibly fascinating, but also incredibly frustrating because it's a very liquid piece in the sense that, say, a piece like Prokofiev Toccata or something like that, it'll you play it, and if you can play it, it'll always sound relatively the same. This one sounds different every
Mm.
single time.
Mm.
The resonance
Interesting.
is so complex, and
Yeah.
and then so uh, it has this element. I find it actually, in a certain sense, the hardest of the set, even though Scarbo has all the fireworks. But Ondine, in terms of finding that sound, finding that resonance, and capturing the melancholy of, but it's not really melancholy because it's almost like a non-human reaction, her emotional
Mm.
state. Because the story of Ondine is basically she falls in love with a mortal man.
Yeah.
Her father says she can't marry him, and she sort of cries, and then she sort of just laughs and disappears. It's a very uh, supernatural kind of being. But you have to think, okay, how does a supernatural? How do you phrase supernatural? How do you find this? So it's not just it can't just be sad or happy. It has to have this whimsical thing. So it was very fun for me to think about these things. I was off away from the instrument, just thinking and also looking for the sound,
And,
looking for
here are my remarks. Just what I do is just stream of consciousness as I'm listening.
that.
And then later I sort it out when I get to the review. But this affinity for the giant spaciousness of Ravel's music, and what I mean also is that relaxed spaciousness, that elegant spaciousness that people have to be particularly patient with, maybe interpreters, and this, of course, sprawling kaleidoscope of pianistic color. It's just amazing. So you clearly spent time understanding how all that flows, and this man is in particular is a colorist hugely.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and also this beautiful understanding of suspending sounds. What impresses me immediately is the effortless way you play this hugely difficult repertoire. And it's not about, of course, woodshedding, but it's something else. That's what I meant about just the natural You just get it. I can't think
But
of any.
I try to also, I mean, my conception of virtuosity is more old school, I think, in the sense that it's not the speed or the volume, which it's as a listener, that's not what impresses me most in terms of virtuosity. It's a whole bunch of other subtle things in the way things are put together, where I find mastery, and as a listener of other pianists, and so I aspire sort of to the same thing. I mean, I don't. I also try to always try to be connected to the narrative, whatever it is I'm saying. So if I have this flashy part, I don't just I don't take it out of context and just play fast, or I try to keep it connected to whatever aesthetic narrative I'm
Absolutely.
in at the moment, and I try to make it seamless. I try to make it so that it's almost like I wouldn't want the virtuosic element to be sort of the takeaway of this, more just the expressive. Like, uh, you told the story convincingly. That's
Bingo, bingo, you just did it again, which is really seriously about telling the story. And you just described moments ago this avoidance of popular chic, if you will.
yes, popular now. It's very sometimes we forget that a lot of things we think are have been around forever are relatively
Yeah.
new
Yes.
aesthetic things.
Yeah.
No, because and in terms of conception of rhythm, conception of what we were saying, conception of pulse, uh, these things evolve, these things change, and uh, and that's what's fascinating about music making. Because I mean, sometimes my if I were to critique the way classical music is taught, it's taught with a system which is basically derived from the scientific method. Basically, the whole university system is basically derived from the scientific method, and the scientific method is good when you want to converge. So I said, I don't want my doctor to say, "Oh, why don't we try this?" I don't really want that. I want there to be a consensus that
Uh-huh.
doctors sort of agree that this is the best way forward. Same with an engineer. If I go to the hardware and I buy a screw, I'd like for that screw to be the same as the other screw. But for a musician, I don't want that at all.
Yeah.
I love as
Here,
much
here.
diversity as possible. But for that, you have to sort of have different ways of learning as well, I
Yeah.
think, because these tools that we use have been optimized and they function incredibly well for this
Hmm.
convergence.
Hmm.
So as performing artists, we have to be aware of that, to not be sort of taken with the current. You
Yep.
know what?
And oh, it's good. I love talking to people who really can put things so beautifully, express things so beautifully. Uh, but I guess what I was trying to say was, in a way, I think you mentioned earlier, you kind of were a little bit a little bit away from the system, if you will, which could also be the mechanics. In other words, what might be expected in Paris or London of all students who play this particular piece. You were mercifully kind of were able to avoid that stereotyping of how to perform repertoire. How's that?
And avoid it because also I think it would have destroyed me in a sense that I don't function that way. I can't. I sort of I have to go my own way, and then at first you're very self conscious about it, and you feel guilty that you don't do it, but you can't. For me, it's literally I can't. Well, by can't I mean I play horribly if I try. That's what I mean by can't. I can try,
Which means your
but
mind is saying, no, 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 I won't go there, I
yes,
won't go there.
and at one point, the benefit of getting older is that you sort of get to a point where you're saying, okay, well, I mean, this doesn't make any sense. I have to find my own voice. If it if it's a value or if it's not value is irrelevant. It's
Mhm.
the process is to back your vision of what you want to do musically. And in that sense, I really don't even look if the piece has been played a lot. If it's I don't think I have to find new repertoire to channel this because I think if my idea of individualization and subjectivity is correct, then every performance is new repertoire. The way I play on Dean is not the way somebody else plays on Dean. So I don't think it's just changing the notes and always playing. There's a good there are many good things about playing unknown repertoire. I don't want to say that, but what I'm saying is I don't really put that filter. I sort of just say I want to play this repertoire Is it played a lot? Is it not? It's not really a concern of mine.
And
It
also the
becomes, it becomes a concern sometimes professionally, because sometimes if you're going to play with certain orchestras, they don't want to do certain repertoire. Other concert venues want all 20th century. Now I'm working on a CD of all Canadian, living young
wonderful,
Canadian composers,
wonderful.
and so it's not that I'm saying no to new. I'm just saying that I don't differentiate like that. I sort of, if I love Chopin's heroic Polonaise, I'll play it, and even though it's, I mean, I did Beethoven's Sonata Cycle, which is like people are saying, why would you do that? It's been done so many times, but it's more of a something for my interest as like to go through that, and I hope there as well. I hope that I sort of forged a slightly different uh, reading of those pieces than maybe
And
somebody.
just to use that the complete Beethoven piano sonata as an example, this huge undertaking for anyone.
Yes,
What I'm getting from you, and also from this CD of your performance of Ravel, is that you quite naturally just simply had to look at each one of these sonatas in your own way, from your own insight, glean your own way, and go forward. So that whole thing about, oh, well, it's the 17th complete Beethoven piano sonatas. Well, that's the whole beauty of performers and performance and the whole thing, that somebody does it this way and the conductors do it, and so in my case, my thing is I can't listen to Beethoven now that we're real clear about the tempi, that he was right all along. He said faster, faster, faster. But see what
yes,
I mean? So everybody is still stuck in the other mechanics, the earlier taught mechanics. If I'm still on line with our conversation of Beethoven Ninth Symphony, and they
right.
just won't move, even though the proof is now overwhelming. And by the way, the magic is exciting. So it's just, and as you said, everything is evolving. Remember, Baroque music recorded in the 50s was garbage, really.
But there was some stuff good.
Okay.
It's,
Sorry if anybody's still alive from the
but I mean,
50s,
I
but
sort
you
of
know
see
what
it
I'm
like,
trying to say, yeah.
no, no, yes, but I mean, that's also we have to. I don't know. I think even even though aesthetics change, in a way, it's almost you have to sort of evaluate the other performances within their sort of framework, almost like
Yeah.
I remember reading what's like I think it was political history, where the difference between just normal history and I think it was political history, where it's saying that something is to analyze ideas, but the other thing is to analyze ideas within the context of when they were
Yeah,
produced,
exactly right.
try to see them through that lens.
Exactly right.
And
Yeah.
and again, with art, it's interesting because some of these slow tempo. Because I mean, Furtwängler was notoriously slow tempo, but still, some of the things he's done, for me, it's
Sure.
magical.
Yeah,
Some of the,
absolutely. By the way,
and then you have say Norrington, I think, for example, who was very much with trying to do with
yep.
modern, which is fine as well. Again,
Yeah.
there could be good versions and bad versions in both universes. No?
And there's education. In other words, I'm not going to let you go on these 40s and 50s recordings of Baroque repertoire. They just didn't know. Okay, now
Yes,
we know better about lighter bow, the Baroque instruments and performance practice and all the rest of it. So, but it just kills me. Schubert did the same thing. Faster, faster, faster. Now we're hearing those Schubert symphonies done in 2 rather than 4, finally, and they fly. It's wonderful. So let's get back to Ravel.
yes.
I mean, do you want to? Do we have anything to say? We're still in Gaspard, but Le Gibet. Is
Well,
there anything in
it's
that piece? The Gallows. It's
it's a
kind of a
mar-
short little piece.
it's almost that one's almost cinematic, really, because
Yeah.
the way even the poem, the way it describes it, because it's sort of it's he does this a lot. He sort of starts in mystery. He that one starts sort of
You mean
saying
Ravel, correct?
Ravel, like in
Yeah.
some of these pieces, like Valse is the same in that sense,
Yeah.
where he's asking questions. What is this? What is this? Could it
Yeah.
be this? And I always get this sort of like a zooming in effect where we're going into the details where he describes the spider web in one thing, this other thing, the
Hmm.
cricket,
Very
and
carefully, by the way.
that's right. And then at one point it starts panning out, panning out, panning out until you get the whole picture. and then you realize that that repeated note was the bell tolling, the village bell, church bell tolling constantly, and it has this hypnotic effect. Well, Ravel, with his hypnotic effects, was also a master. I mean, think of the bolero as well. Here he has that constant bell ringing, you know, those B flats, and then everything happens around that. Everything happens with that, and I like this playing of how, because you're supposed to play all of it, most of it, from mezzo forte downwards. You can't really play too loud, but there are moments that are extremely tense, even though it's not loud. So how to generate this idea of closeness without having to play loud, this idea of intensity. That's an interesting challenge also from an interpretive point of view. And that piece is amazing. You know? And then, well, then Scarbo,
Let's talk about that. The vampiric dwarf with
so
specialized tastes. That's what I read. Somebody
yes,
said.
so creative, the imagery, and
And there's a
so
tremulous kind of anticipatory thing in the very beginning too. I mean, the storytelling is amazing. Ravel's
yes,
capacity as
because
storyteller.
it's almost like it has this fear factor of the main character sort of not understanding what happens. This sort of gnome appears and disappears, and suddenly he's somewhere, and then he's gigantic, and then in the middle he he goes into this sort of feverish dream. It's almost like a hallucination. It's the same theme, but it's almost at half speed or even less. And it's this play again, this psychological play on time, because it's how to make it sound like what is how to make it sound like a fever. What does it mean to sound feverish? How to make the passage of time sound that it's the same idea, but it's going slowly. But it's not because the idea is slow, but it's because your perception of it is slowed down because you're in a sort of altered state. How do you do this?
It's
These are the
mind-boggling, is what it really is. It's really
these are the
mind-boggling.
interpretive decisions I love to think about. I love to think about, and I suffer because the process of trying to find it is always difficult because it's always you always have to look and look and look
Yeah,
and
yeah,
look.
yeah, 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 yeah. And the finished product is absolutely extraordinary. Let's just get clear, because there are a gazillion recordings of these works, and yours is really unique in the most subtle sub-basement manner. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. You're not hunting, you're not searching to be unique, you're not trying to do anything. You're just getting to the bottom of how it all works, really.
Well,
And
this goes a bit to the because you sort of go to the clarity of it, but this goes a bit to that the word I used about playing honestly,
yes.
where when you play, it gets to a point where you artifact is very noticeable very
Mm,
quickly,
mm.
and it gets tired. It gets boring fast. This is the other thing I find. You know, it could be interesting once, but on a CD where you'd like for people to re-listen to it, it it, it can't be too gimmicky. It can't be.
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way,
It's
the public sees through all of that stuff.
absolutely
Yeah, they see
either
right through it.
either consciously or just by losing interest.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly right. Well, that's very one point. And you just said I have a little note here. I'm examination clarifications pianistically. This huge sound, and still I hear everything. I mean, it's your pianism, if that's the right word, is fabulous. And again, we've talked over and over about it. Musicians who intuit, who I just can, who figure it out, figure stuff out. That's what the real work is about, is figuring out
I
exactly what's
think
being
so,
said.
and also trying to like just honestly making an artistic proposal, saying
Yeah,
this is how my vision of it,
yeah.
and just and I think that at the end of the day, that's the only thing that sort of
And that is the whole point,
that is the whole point.
of a real artist. Not to labor artists and artists and all that stuff, but the word is not abused in this case. And what we've been talking about are musicians who not that they're not artists, but they fall into the traps, the imitative traps, the fashion traps, the
Yeah.
competition traps. So that's why this CD is so refreshing. I want to we're kind of getting a little tight here, so I'm going to try and move on. Let's do Jodeux. Water Games again, 1901.
Yes, yes, and this was very much inspired by Liszt's Jeu de la Villa de l'Est.
Aha, I see.
And this sort of opened up Ravel sound. This is
That's what I had read. I didn't realize that. Yeah, this really changed. Basically, he was coming up flat, and then this piece apparently just was his first breakthrough in terms of finding himself. Yeah.
yes, yes, and again, it has a lot of the elements of Undine. It's a completely different psychological framework. Here, it has that little epitaph that says, "The river god laughs while the water tickles him."
I missed that one. I'll have to find that one. That's a good one.
Yes, and it's basically yes, just sparkling and then it has this beautiful sort of almost like a sunset at the end. In the videos, if you look at the videos I did, I sort of end with a sunset by the ocean there, overlaid over my hands playing. And
I
it's
did not. I am so, usually I on the day of my research I would go there, but I guess I just didn't. But I'm going to now because they're certainly going to go up on the page if you have video performances of this stuff. I'm dying to see what you look like playing. You know what I mean? How you manage it all. Now and I've just seen my note to myself in 20 font about how this was really a breakthrough for Ravel, and then from there on out he and as you have said earlier about yourself, finding who you are, all of us,
and
finding who
also
we are.
the psychological sort of just standing your ground aesthetically. Um, I think this piece for him in the piano for his piano repertoire, he sort of he said, okay, this is where it goes, this is where it flows, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Where it just this is where and his creativity, his harmonies are so beautiful and so creative. The way he uses the piano was so new in a way,
Mm.
and this piece sort of started it all in a way. And I told you the idea of putting it first on the CD, but I actually thought of putting the big guns on the extremes, Gaspar and Lavance,
Hmm.
and then this as a step between Gaspar and Miroir.
Makes sense to me also. Even in if you will, not that it's that important, but in the years of composition.
Yeah,
1904, 1905. I'm looking at Miroir, which is next, and you kind of do a little bit of chronology there in the middle, in the center of the piece,
yeah.
if I've got it right. Not because you need to be chronological, I'm sure, but just
But
just
you
works.
thought, how would if this were a concert, what people would play? What order would I play it in to give it a certain coherence
Yeah,
in terms of energy? And I thought you have to finish with Lavance.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
can't finish with anything else. And
That's
Lavance
right.
has to be as far away from Gaspar as possible because so they don't cancel each other out. And that toile is a big piece,
Yeah.
but it's so subtle, so delicate. It's a
Uh-huh.
different type of big piece.
Yeah.
I
And we
mean,
have the
yeah,
chronology of years and growth, musical growth, and all the rest of it that's very important. And Laval's has to be the end because he's essentially saying,
yeah,
in a way, he's saying,
yeah.
enough, I've had it with all of you. I mean, people don't seem to quite get that, but it's a very, very macabre
Oh,
waltz indeed.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so let's have a look at Miroir for a moment. Noctuelle, Moths, probably one of the most famous sections,
well,
dedicated
this
to poet Léon Paul Farjou. Anyway, yeah, go.
well, this is one of the ones with multiple layers, no? Because I mean, it is describing moths, but it's
And
more
other
describing
and earlier composers and whatnot, and other
yes, and it's
composers, yeah.
describing sort of their
Uh-huh.
nighttime interactions at these soirees where they get together and they talk about ideas and discuss things. It's
Oh,
sort of
nice.
this sort of idea, you know. But again, pianistically, it's so creative the way he writes this music. It's just it's so it's so transparent the texture and so light
And
and
also, they're all each of these pieces are descriptive, And I loved the title of this kind of artistic outcast group, Les Apaches, which I assume means the Apaches, the
yes,
renegades, the off the reservation crowd. So that's charming and very very Elgar, very all the other composers. And speaking of secrets and little formulas and so. By the way, in the very first bars, you may answer this for me. I swear I heard something, a little excerpt or something, and I just can't quite remember. It kind of went by me. And do you have any memory of in the first bars of Noctuelle, if there's a little quote hidden in there of somebody?
well, there's a lot of everything Yeah, I'm sure there's so much more that even
Yeah,
that Kyle sort of is. He probably was happy knowing that no one will ever find out
yeah,
about what. Like it's just.
yeah.
But at the very beginning, let me think of L'Etoile.
Just a tiny little fragment of a tune went by, and I thought, damn, is that Tchaikovsky or something? I'm just, throwing that name out, but something that sounded like him.
It sort of escaped at the moment. It just escaped.
Doesn't matter. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, but interesting, interesting. Uh,
And it
but again,
speaks to all of that. This about they're not exactly secrets. They're little, as you said. Then he sits back, as composers do. I'm thinking of Help, the variations on a nursery tune of Help, the Hungarian Dochnányi, Ernst Dochnányi. That piece is magnificent. I just did program notes on it, but it's magnificent, and I heard Twinkle Twinkle Little Star there, and then I heard it again there, and I never heard anything that even sounded anywhere close in between. Just the magic of composers and their brains and how they play and make jest and so on. This is exactly correct. But I love that. I didn't know that this one group was called Les Apaches.
and with meanwhile, you can imagine that so many of these ideas just came out just through their meetings and just
Oh,
talking and
yeah.
just reminiscing, and they said something, and maybe, like you said, maybe they mentioned something about Tchaikovsky, and then
Something,
he
maybe.
talked about it with the person he's homaging, and then he just puts that little bit in there to remember their conversation.
Something like that. It's so brilliant.
I have no doubt it is that.
Oiseaux triste, sad birds. I mean,
Yes.
that is very interesting. Sad birds. I'm doing a kind of literal Yankee translation, but dedicated to the Spanish pianist Ricardo Viñes.
Yes, and I think it's also linked a bit to Ondine because it has this
Ah,
descending third, which is Ondine, the mermaid has it, and
uh-huh.
also the bird, the very sad bird, and it's constantly doing this descending third, and it has this sort of hypnotic, uh, not as shimmery as Ondine, but I found certain similarities in terms of this idea.
Yeah, and that's no accident for sure. Not with Ravel,
No,
And I
and
have a little quote here from Ravel that you probably are aware of. Quote, it evokes birds lost in the oppressiveness of a very dark forest during the hottest hours of summer. Now, let alone trying to imagine, that he somehow had that in his head when he was writing this piece. Just his remark, alone in the forest, that's crazy and fascinating enough, but during the hottest hours of
well, to me,
summer.
it brings the imagery of, Le Douanier Rousseau, those paintings of those forest paintings. But it's interesting also the conception of the forest, no? Because the forest, symbolically, it could mean so many different things to different. Like here, he obviously thinks of it as something like, because solitude as well could be seen as something inspiring or something to dread. And this is
Hmm.
extremely sad,
Yeah.
extremely sad the way he carries it it through the piece. No, it's a very sad
Yeah.
piece. Very,
And again, very, very deep and very profound. I mean, that's what overall, I'm sure he was a member of a secret society. He had to have been. I mean, he had to have been
and
because the secrets
Messiaen,
are too many.
and he sort of served it to Messiaen to do his future verse.
Oh, well
Uh,
put.
he sort of you have it there. You
Yeah,
have
well put, well put. Un bar sur l'océan, a boat
that's
on the ocean.
that's the crowd favorite, I think. Well, maybe with Alborada as well, but Umbarso de Ocean again. Just the way he it's actually quite a complex. It's interesting because a lot of pieces that are very popular from by Ravel are actually musically very complex. They're not easy pieces to listen to or to play. This one actually has a lot of complexity. It's the very thick texture, very layered, especially in the louder sections when you get all this tempestuousness. But then it has this. You can almost feel the splashing of the sea breeze,
That's right. Yep.
the gesture that just constantly. Uh, yes, it's a wonderful piece. Also very obviously the water element there is very strong.
Yeah.
It is strong, except for maybe in Alborada would be the one that doesn't have the water element too present. It's a bit more arid, more Andalusian, I guess.
Yeah. Good. Very good point. That's very interesting
But
way
it's
of looking
it's
at it.
and in a way you can think if you think Ondine you have again, Les Gibet is also very dry in a sense. It's very It's almost like it's a similar combination. Ondine Le Gibet, completely different character, you know, Le Gibet to
Hmm.
Alborada, but Umbark and Alborada, this sort of contrast and maybe it's also thought that way in terms of just so for performance reasons, for contrast and things like that. The way how he structured this piece, no, why he finishes with Le Valet des Cloches is also interesting. No, not finishing with Alborada. It's sort of interesting how he sort of structured it uh, in the order. And Umbark is probably yes, with Alborada, the two longest pieces.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and, uh, and yes, I always find it fascinating how he gets all these different ways of creating this shimmering effect. So different. Each one different ways to different ways to sort of use the piano
Mm.
to mimic water, and different kinds of water, a stream, a wave.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And it's not just for nothing or for fun and games. That's what I'm trying to get at. This water imagery is deep, so to
yes,
say. Forgive me.
absolutely.
And I'm somewhere down here. It'll show up in the review maybe, but I had to look up the imagery, the symbolism of water, and it's pretty much divination and looking into the water to see the future and moving forward and stuff like that.
Didn't Jung say that water is the subconscious? Something
That hits it right on the head. Yeah, you
I think
bet.
so.
Yeah.
And also, yes, and then you think, but also, how much is one prone to find water because it's so linked to the emotions? Because a lot of times, even in Schubert, his
Hmm.
accompaniments
Hmm.
are very liquidy. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Nice.
but here it's
But at this,
obviously
yeah,
explicit,
at
an
this stage
explicit.
of the game, we're talking heavy duty, lots of imagery, lots of symbols, lots of
Yes,
secrets,
absolutely.
lots of deep stuff going on. That's the French. That's just the French anyway. I think
Yeah,
really they're renowned intellectuals. I don't. I've got to stop flapping my hands. But just amazing. And again, I had a friend who specialized in Ravel, and I couldn't quite understand it. I've been afraid as a conductor of Ravel's music, of French music, French Impressionist music. Now I'm old. I've figured it out kind of. I don't have to be fearful anymore. But you know what I mean? It's tough to bring all that stuff together in any of this piano music, let alone orchestral music. Um,
absolutely. Because Debussy, for example, he did not like the title of impressionist. He
hmm.
said he was a symbolist, and
Oh,
that goes
that's
for Ravel as well.
that's
A
even
lot more
deeper.
there's a
That's
lot
even
more symbolism than just
yeah.
nice colors and
Yeah,
effects.
yeah. Okay, very well. And we can put Ravel in that crowd too, right? Lots of symbols. That's what I'm getting at. I keep seeing this image, and it's from the whatever, the Abbé de Zion or something, that sect, and it helped me understand Renaissance art. Frankly, the idea that secrets,
Oh, of course.
images are hidden in the paintings, castles in certain ways, or hills that signify stuff, and that's Ravel in the late 19th, early 20th century as a musician composer, the secrets, the castles, the mysteries on the hill, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
How we do? Did we get through that
Absolutely.
one? Um,
And maybe that actually informs the order of Miloire. Maybe there is some sort of there's some sort of because again, if you think about it from a performance point of view, it's sort of strange the order, especially the ending, to finish with Le Valet de Cloche,
uh
no?
huh.
Unless it has some sort of cryptic or
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
cryptic meaning, some sort of initiatic kind of transformation, how you go
Hmm.
from one to the other, you know?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of Ravel, of studying Ravel. Really, is you have to think that way. It's not just about notes and interpretation and the such and such prize. It's about what was this man's mind up to. Valet de Cloche, Valley of Bells, dedicated to composer pianist Maurice Delage. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Musical imagery, we've been talking about it all night. I mean, that is Ravel, musical imagery. Par excellence, pianist. You happily break down the strict bar line in this one in particular, I thought. In other words, you favor the story
Yes.
and its flow over the and I'm a fan of getting rid of the bar line. It's so look in choral music. You have to get rid of the bar line for choral music to make any kind of sense at all. Anyway, beautiful performance. You understood it's oh, and this leisure. Speaking of tempi, that can be leisurely. This is really your choice of tempo here in La Vallée is really kind of lovely and leisurely, maybe even late 19th
I
century.
found, like, I listened to a couple of versions and I've
Yeah.
always found it very rushed for some reason. I always found,
Hmm.
but I think that's sort of because of the movies. I think
Hmm.
this inspired so much of music for movie, this kind of writing,
Uh-huh.
and then one immediately associates this kind of movie kind of pace, which maybe makes it, for in my head, feel better slower, a little bit slower,
Yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah,
for that
yeah.
kind of
Besides, you
for the
hear
effect
more.
I'm looking for.
Not only do you hear more, we got to remember, are we still in 1908?
Mm.
When it would take you 3 hours to dress for dinner while the horse was being,
Yeah,
saddled up with the carriage. Come on, where everything was slower. Everything was slower.
everything.
So to a part of our earlier conversation, part of me loves the old conductors because
Mm.
they are still remembering that tradition. Gaslight, dressing for dinner, all of that's much slower pace. Um, and I'm glad that certain things have been clarified about tempi. We don't want to talk that one to death. All right, it's your turn now. La valse,
Well,
poème chorégraphique.
this is such an incredible
Yeah.
piece, and it's interesting because although Ravel did write he wrote a piano version. Uh, you want to put a little bit more in it than what he has in his orchestral. So
Hmm.
and so I think most pianists do this. Most pianists add a couple of things in the spirit of
Uh-huh.
trying to capture what he, because the orchestral piece is such a marvel. In a way, I think that the orchestral piece helps the piano version in a way that in pictures and exhibition it's almost the opposite. The orchestral piece actually damages the piano version, which is a bit. Uh,
Very interesting. And I would say, as a conductor, that the piano version of La Valse helps me understand the orchestral version better.
right. Well,
Yeah.
and the imagery here, I love this sort of image here, because this is where the both old world and new world collide, no? Because it has this sort of fin de siècle decadent,
That's right.
but it also starts with this sort of this image of you're in the clouds. You don't know what's going on. You just hear almost like a heartbeat. Then it starts clearing up, and you're suddenly in this ballroom, and then this classical waltz. And apparently, he wanted to name the piece Vienna first. He thought of naming it Vienna
Well,
instead of.
that would never have done. I mean, they would have been quite upset about that one.
And I think the timing of it wasn't good. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that helped him,
considering. Um,
that helped him change his mind.
And we've
But
had that talk about being traumatized by these world wars, and I go back to the Napoleonic Wars, and then World War One, World War Two, and so on, Vietnam. How whole societies can be so completely traumatized for years and years and years after this World War One really got, as it had to have, really, he saw and heard and participated in things that traumatized him, and he wanted to make sure the world knew that the old way, the waltz, if you will, the grand ballroom of the aristocracy is gone. That whole last
happened
crash.
is also this thing where you reach this sort of summit of refinement and everything, and it led to catastrophe. It led to almost destruction, and so it sort of it makes you question everything, you know, and all of this, and he captures it so well in this piece. In this, it has all these layers and all these sort of images that in a way, you know, what made me think of this, James Joyce, in a way, where by purposely misspelling words,
Yeah. Yes.
they would suggest other words and other stories that sort of mix into the story you're trying to read. Sometimes to a point where you don't even know what you're trying to read. It's so confusing. But
And you
by
know about how his editors ruined it all. They didn't understand where he was coming from with those words at all. So
really,
I'm thinking of Ulysses. They re-edited Ulysses against
really,
his will. Yeah. So the early editions of Ulysses are corrected, and he had no,
right.
you know.
And then you lose. That's like pasteurized milk and cheese, right? You lose all the bacteria. You lose all the wonderful, because a lot of it is our own mind interacting. So when we get just little elements, we don't need full-fledged like quotes or something. Just maybe like what you said at the beginning of Note 12, maybe a couple of notes, and that's enough for you and your mind to construct
Uh-huh.
an association. And La Valse has this in spades. It has just layers, and then you get these sort of uh, sound effects, no? Sound effects which could be like big, grand waltz, orchestra percussions, or bombs exploding in the
Yeah.
battlefield. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a bit
Or the
confusing.
visit by the Red Death. You know what I mean? It's
It's
a
purposely
macabre.
vague. It's
Yeah.
purposely vague. And I think it's such a fantastic piece. And though some don't consider one of his, like, should be included in his piano pieces, sort of like
Because of, yeah.
it's a transcription. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but again, it's such incredible music, and
Boy, talk about that. That's exactly the wrong attitude for people to have. Which, oh, well, it was an orchestral piece and the piano, and then he rewrote it for piano. The piano version is just not. If I understand what you're
yeah.
implying, it means that they're idiots.
Hmm.
You know,
Well, yeah,
that a lot of people just don't see past the brick walls that they assemble for themselves in front of stuff, and whatever
yeah,
that.
but again, I think it goes back to this sort of encyclopedic things. And technically,
Mm.
it's not a piano work, but I mean,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, like, with all due respect, who cares? Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
beautiful music, and again, uh, not to take away from the orchestral piece, which is also beautiful music, but I think the piano piece has its positive elements. I mean, there's some parts which I can say I like more how they sound in the piano piece than in the orchestra. Like a lot of effects,
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of a lot of rubatos that are easier to do just being one person to do this sort of waltz, because this three of the waltz is always very, all of the swing that the waltz,
Uh-huh. Yep.
the rubato is harder to do with an orchestra. With the piano, you can sort of emulate that very easily.
Yep.
And
And I just finished writing program notes for this piece for a concert. I don't know, somewhere Long Beach or something, coming up for symphony season, and that was and so I have listened to, because I'm the conductor, I want to hear the piano versions. So in the past, before in meeting you today, I've listened to two or three piano versions of La Valse, and again, I'm just going to I'm going to read now from my stream of consciousness notes. Performed beautifully, now it works itself up again for a faster paced recap of the material. Building, the frenzy is about to burst, but in your case, it's delicious frenzy. You know what I'm saying? It's never over the top. Wow, wow, wow. Absolute fun and perfection. Balances are, as throughout the CD, unreal. I mean, the balancing is in the two-hand balancing. That's you, but let alone the understanding how the writing is. I'm thinking as a non-pianist, and then again, all 10 fingers seem equally balanced. That's about the third time I've mentioned. I hear everything. It's amazing.
they're put to the test in this piece. I tell you, it's
Oh, I'll
really
bet.
a very difficult piece.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't know. Compared to Scarbo, that's a hard one because Scarbo has been with me so much longer that I sort of forgot how difficult. Like, the pieces you've played since you're young. You're now. I love this story about, it's Nathan Milstein, where they asked him, Maestro, is that piece difficult? He's going, I didn't understand this difficult. Either you play it or you don't. If you can play it, it's not difficult. And, but with La Valse, which I studied later, I was very aware of the difficulty. It's a hard piece.
And also that big in the orchestral version, that big cataclysmic last couple bars is intended as he basically thumbing his nose on this whole mess that is just concluded, called World War I and the end of the monarchy and all the rest of it. But in the pianistic version and in your performance, I say the last notes wonderful rather than cataclysmic. What I mean by that is I say actually cataclysmic overdrive. You know what I mean? Many
Yeah.
pianists will try to imitate the orchestral version with their 10
Yes.
fingers.
Exactly.
And it's
Yes.
just a big noisy mess. So my
Yes.
compliment to you is that you all, I hear all 10 fingers going, but you do, as you have through this whole CD, this wonderful equanimity. That's not quite the word, but you know what I mean? It's like you're really very, very cool.
Huh.
Okay? Look, we got to end this thing. I'm wheeling up here to the top. Did I miss anything, or do you need to make any last
Well,
rights
we
or
sort of covered all the pieces
we?
in the disc. We covered the genesis of how this project became
Yeah.
a reality, and this allowed me that through Ron Royer, through the Discover Philharmonic, I came into contact with Akashic Records, and they wanted to start their classical branch of
Wow.
so mine wasn't the first, was one of the first, and
Nice.
that's great. And then Jeff Wolpert, who did the mastering, fantastic job,
Beautiful. Beautiful job.
fantastic job. And it's also, this is the silver lining. And this is the silver lining of the what was the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
Because if not, honestly, I don't know if I would have had the time to
Hmm.
do this a project like this
Hmm.
if I was traveling and performing all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it was very much a team effort because the videos and the interest in that, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic, and we built this community, this network, which is now here for future projects. The Canadian CD. There's so many things that can grow because it's a good team. It's
Yeah.
a good team
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
which is fantastic as well.
And also
Because just as a soloist, as a concert pianist, it's very lonely. You're basically on
sure.
your own most of the time. Even when you play with orchestra, you go to the hotel,
Yeah. Yeah.
you practice, and this sort of allowed this sort of collaborative thing, which was fantastic, which
Yeah.
I really enjoyed. At this moment in my career, I really value that.
And also, it strikes me that in your case, in my case, I told you, I just found myself staring out the window in a state of shock for about 6 months. But in your case, in terms of preparing the CD, the plague, I'm just going to call it that, uh, really may have given you the opportunity to become even more introspective than you already are. I mean, you really clearly examined these pieces on very,
Oh,
very deep levels.
absolutely, and it was almost like an emotional necessity to
Mm,
do this, and it's true. I mean, and this happens a lot if you look at, say, some of the great, great art that's been done in like
yeah,
terrible, very difficult circumstances.
yeah.
Because you either channel it to despair or you try to find an artistic vent
Uh,
to deal with all these emotions.
yeah. Bravo. What a great talk with Canadian Argentinian pianist Alexander Panizza. We are discussing this. Will all go up at Performing Arts Review with a page, and now I know there are some videos I'll track down on YouTube and whatnot. Your 2022 Akashic Classics CD, Panizza Plays Ravel, and boy do you. And I mean wonderfully, just gorgeous, gorgeous performances. And again, we've discussed the instrument, just perfect, and the engineering and all the rest of it, and you as producer, it just was a wonderful experience. But most importantly of all, I heard this music for the first time.
Uh, that, that,
Okay,
that's a great compliment. Thank you so much. I mean,
it's
that
very
means a
very
lot.
important. Okay, we better hang up. It's almost 1:30. So or an hour. We've been going an hour, almost an hour and a half. And again, we've had this talk. People will dip in, they'll listen. Maybe they'll be devoted and listen to the whole thing. My cat's dying on me over here. Uh,
Well,
but it doesn't matter. We've done what we needed to do. It's done. Then it'll go up, and
thank
that's
you
it.
so much for this.
Sure.
Very,
Great,
very,
great, great
very
pleasure. Okay.